You in the back and then you in red.
What was the inspiration behind the universe?
What was the inspiration behind the Ultimate Universe?
Desperation. You know, it was a pretty crazy time. I had just taken over as editor-in-chief, and Marvel was just out of bankruptcy, and things were not looking good in the comic industry at all. I mean, we were this close to extinction, and we had Marvel had a new president of publishing, Bill Jemis at the time, and we sat down and he's like, you know, we need to do this new universe that is less tied in continuity and gives a fresh start and a fresh perspective on our characters. And we just sort of hammered away at it, and eventually, you know, came up with the right creators, the right mix for it. And it was one of those things. We did many things, more things than I could even, you know, shake a stick at. Where we just took stuff and threw it against the wall to see what would stick. It was very much like the Wild West in 2000, because again, we had nowhere to go but up at that point. So it allowed for something like the Ultimate Universe to not just happen, because we've tried things like that in the past, but it was the right mix of creators, and the audience was ready for it, and it was the right take on Peter Parker, and the right take on the X-Men, and the right take on the Avengers. But it was strictly the time, the place, and the people who were there, and just you know, daring to try to make it happen. So.
My question's about X-Men Forever.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to know, after all this time, what made you want to return to X-Men? And after shaping so much of X-Men continuity, what made you decide to work outside of continuity?
Well, part of it was the practical reality that Axel had just taken over as command editor of the X-Men department. He had his own vision for where he wanted Uncanny and the other books to go. Part of it was, some years ago, I'd given a huge list of proposals to Joe to say, you know, this is my laundry list. What do you think? And some he liked, some he didn't like, and he and Mark Fennessy, I guess, were sitting down one day over the ubiquitous cup of Joe, oddly enough. And this came up, and I hadn't really thought about it. And the fascinating thing I discovered was that I had actually thought I'd pretty much told the story back then. And the more I started looking over it and kicking it around, and the more we sketched out the parameters of it, which sort of came to a head the first lunch, where Mark and I were sitting down and, you know, what the hell, let's kill Wolverine. I mean, no one else is going to do it and get away with it. We don't have to sustain the franchise. We can do stuff like that. God, they'll really hate that. They will go berserk, and we have to keep our mouths shut for a year while we put it together. And Joe won't even notice because he's worried about real stuff. And we did. And the idea with the series then and now is that literally here, because we don't have to sustain the franchise, anything goes. Anything can happen. Everyone is at risk. And we're not locked into any preconceptions on any side, which allows us the ability to have more fun, but also strike a path that is perhaps, hopefully, as different and enticing in its own way as Uncanny and the Central series will be for their fans. And, you know, quite my own personal hope is we kick their ass. Nothing personal. And I'm sure Axel feels the same way in return.
Gentleman over here. Over here.
Hi, fellas. I think the question really talking about age issue would be when are those kids from Archie Comics ever going to graduate high school? I mean, they've been in high school for 5,000 years, it seems like. Anyway, I'm a high school teacher, and I teach math, and I spend 5 hours on a lesson plan, adding and subtracting integers, go around the room, check the kids' work, see pictures of Spider-Man, Iron Man. So my question really is, and some of the work, to me, is amazing. I mean, I'm no artist, but it blows my mind. What type of encouragement would you give to, or what would you say to a young artist who's trying to break into the business and is at his lowest point where it really feels like, I'm never going to make it, but I want to make it? What type of encouragement would you give them?
The only encouragement you can give an artist is just to keep going. It's I'll digress for a second. When I was in art school, I went to art college, School of Visual Arts. Senior year, you're required to take this master senior illustration course. And in that illustration course, it was taught by Marshall Harrisman, a very famous illustrator. He didn't teach painting or anatomy. He sat and taught us the business of art. And he made a very, very important point that stuck with me, because I wasn't the best guy in the school, by far. There were people there who were immensely talented. And he said, he's talking to a class of 150 kids sitting in an amphitheater. And he said, here's what's going to happen when you guys graduate from here. You're going to have, let's take artist A. He's top student in the school, magnificent illustrator, could probably start getting work within the next year or so professionally. And here's artist B, and he or she is sort of middle of the class, but they got a lot of get up and go and a thicker skin. And what will happen is, as a young kid coming out of art school, and unless you are a absolute genius, chances are your first 3, 4, 5, 6 attempts to try to get freelance work, you're going to be rejected. No matter whether you're the best kid in the class or the middle of the road kid in the class. And what will happen is, if artist A is not made of the right stuff internally, having the right confidence, by the 10th, or the 15th rejection, he or she may just say, I can't do this anymore, and will end up working, at the Dairy Queen. Whereas artist B, with the sort of the thicker skin, well, yeah, he or she will get rejected those 10 or 15 times. They'll get rejected 30 times, 40 times, 50 times. On that 100th time, that first time they get work, they become a working professional artist. And what happens is, and I know this from my case, and I'm sure everybody here can speak the same way, work begets work. And once you get that first job, now you start knowing how the business works, and you start approaching it differently. And the more you do it, the more your craft will improve. And before you know it, this particular person ends up being the working professional. And I can honestly say that ended up being really true for me, because I was very middle of the road in art college from my perspective. And I know that several of the kids that were really top notch in my particular class, didn't quite make it. So that's really the only advice, aside from learn your craft, which is very, very important. But you gotta have that desire to keep going if you really, really want it, and be realistic to yourself with what you need to do to attain those goals.